Hey everyone, Megan here. Today I'm going to discuss Jane Austen's most romantic novel, Persuasion. Now here's a little update on where I'm at with my journey to Jane Austen. So I have been reading two of Jane Austen's novels per month along with a nonfiction. Now for April I had planned on reading the letters of Jane Austen's letters collected and edited by Deirdre LaFay. However, I thought it was available on ebook, but I couldn't find it, so I have ordered it. So I'm going to wait for it to arrive. Now, because of everything that's happening in our world, of course, the mail system has slowed down considerably, and totally understandably, so I'm not sure when I'll receive that. But I thought because my actual journey to Jane Austen's homes, her land, all that, not that she owned any land, but you know what I mean, where she lived, because that has been canceled for 2020, the pressure isn't quite on as much as it originally was for me to be reading, one nonfiction a month by Jane Austen or about Jane Austen. So that is okay. If I don't get to a nonfiction in April or in May for that matter, that's okay because I do have a lot of other books and things that I want to read, and when I go on my trip next year, I'll be reading those nonfiction books then. So yeah, let's dive right into it with Persuasion. I love this book a lot. If you've watched my ranking Jane Austen videos that I did with my cousin Naomi, well, I guess it was just one video, I'll link that below in the Jane Austen playlist. I ranked Persuasion as number 2. So some themes in Persuasion are living the life that you didn't expect to lead, putting your heart out there, second chances, all great themes to read about. So yeah, I'll just give a plot summary of Persuasion here. So Persuasion is about Anne Elliot. She is a single woman of 27 years old, which makes her the oldest of Jane Austen's heroines, except of course Lady Susan, who is 35. So Anne Elliot, 8 years earlier when she was 19 years old, was engaged to a man named Frederick Wentworth. They were deeply in love. However, Frederick was not of her social standing. He was actually in the Navy and he had not made his fortune yet. A mentor of hers, who was her mother's best friend before her mother died, named Lady Russell, persuades her to break off the engagement. So she does. And then we skip to 8 years later, and Frederick Wentworth, now Captain Frederick Wentworth, who has made his fortune in the war, they reconnect, not necessarily by their choice, but through a few circumstances. And we go from there. So yeah, I love this book. It is so good. It is so delightful. So I should put a warning here. There will be spoilers. I'm not sure exactly when the spoilers will come up, but they will come up. So just so you're forewarned. So I thought I'd read a couple quotes because of course we have what I've been doing in my Journey to Jane Austen series is that I read 2 quotes at the beginning of the video and I don't tell who said them. That's for you to guess who said the quotes, and then at the end of the video I say who said the quotes and you can see if you're right. So yeah, this first quote comes from chapter 7. Let's see, where is it here? Okay. This is from chapter 7. She was quite unpersuadable. So that's the first quote. She was quite unpersuadable. So I guess in that case, don't guess who said it, guess who the quote is talking about. And then the second quote, let's see here. The second quote is, but I hate to hear you talking so like a fine gentleman and as if women were all fine ladies instead of rational creatures. We none of us expect to be in smooth water all our days. So number 1, I want you to guess who said it, and number 2, who is the quote talking about? Okay, let's get into my thoughts. I love Admiral Croft and Mrs. Croft's relationship. So Mrs. Croft is the sister of Frederick Wentworth. And they are such a delightful couple, the Admiral and Mrs. Croft. They have a very close relationship there. She was on board with him for a lot of his career. So, and this was quite common where women would be on board with their husbands, even down to the carpenters. They had their wives on board. So this idea of women not being on board actually isn't true, at least in the British Navy in this time. So she would have been in battle. Like, she would have been in battle. She saw a lot. Even back then, they were going to give out medals to people who had been in the battle, and of course, all the wives are like, "Hey, we were there too," but they weren't technically sanctioned by the crown, so they didn't get the medals in the end. So that, I'm sure that has really drawn them close together. And one just like example of their relationship that I love is when Anne is riding with Admiral Croft and Mrs. Croft in their carriage. The admiral's kind of driving a bit crazy, and they're like almost running into things, and Mrs. Croft is just like, oh, you turn over here, and she's just like, kind of like, just stepping in and kind of guiding the admiral so they don't like crash. So it just kind of shows that he is like, he's out there and he's bold and he's like doing his thing, and then his wife is kind of like, oh, just adjust a little bit here, adjust a little bit there, and then we won't capsize. So yeah, I love their relationship. Okay, let's get into what we're all really here for, which is Anne and Captain Wentworth's relationship. Oh my goodness, it is so good. I won't get into it, but Louisa Musgrove, a mutual friend, has smacked her head on the ground and is very injured, and they're looking for someone to help nurse her, to help Mrs. Harville nurse her. And I won't get into who Mrs. Harville is. Maybe I should have given a more detailed plot summary, but oh well. So they're wondering who should stay to care for Louisa. And Captain Wentworth says, he does a name slip here. He says, oh, Mrs. Charles Musgrove should, go back, be with her children, and he uses her full name. This is Anne's sister Mary, who he's talking about. He calls her by her full proper name, Mrs. Charles Musgrove. And then he says, if Mrs. Charles Musgrove will go back to her family, Anne can stay and nurse her. There is no one so proper as Anne. And I love that slip, that nobody else knows their history. Nobody else knows that they loved each other or were engaged. And he totally slips. They just think that, people, and nobody catches this, but it's like, she should like, he's talked more to Mary than he has to Anne, and yet he calls Mary by her full name, Mrs. Charles Musgrove, and then he calls her Anne, and he calls her Anne twice, and I love that. Another thing that Captain Wentworth says is that he makes a big deal about how he loves firmness of character, because, and everybody knows this, everybody knows that he loves that firmness of character, and Anne knows that this is kind of a stab at her, that he's saying, I want somebody who won't be persuaded out of marrying me or persuaded out of important things. He's saying, I want somebody with firmness of character. Now, Louisa, who is really into Captain Wentworth, she wants to show that, hey, I have firmness of character. I'm who you're looking for. And in the end, that's what makes her smack her head on the ground and become injured. Like, she doesn't smack her head, but she falls and hits her head on the ground. So Anne is wondering, I wonder if Captain Wentworth sees that maybe firmness of character can just mean obstinacy, and maybe, being persuaded isn't such a bad thing. I really like that. I appreciate how, it kind of helps him see the value in Anne's character, again, in a new way. One of my favorite moments of Persuasion is when Captain Wentworth and Anne accidentally run into each other in a shop, and they're both realizing that they each love the other person, that the love hasn't gone away. And so I love this quote. I'll just read it to you because no one can say it better than Jane Austen. He was more obviously struck and confused by the sight of her than she had ever observed before. He looked quite red. For the first time since their renewed acquaintance, she felt she was betraying the least sensibility of the two. She had the advantage of him in the preparation of the last few moments. All the overpowering, blinding, bewildering first effects of strong surprise were over with her. Still, however, she had enough to feel. It was agitation, pain, pleasure, something between delight and misery. So they talk for a little while, and it says, they had by dint of being so very much together got to speak to each other with a considerable portion of apparent indifference and calmness, but he could not do it now. So it's just such a great moment when Captain Wentworth is just totally caught off guard, and he's just like, oh my goodness, and then he can't help but show a bit of his feelings. And I think something that kind of helps him see that he does love her is when Louisa is injured, he sees how calmly she acts and how she takes care of everyone. Everyone else is losing it, but she and Captain Wentworth hold it together, and they take care of what's going on. And that really sticks out to her, or to him, and he remembers that. He brings that up again. At one point, so Mr. Elliot he's Anne's cousin, which is kind of weird, but he's kind of back then cousins marry, blah blah blah, and he is trying to woo Anne. Basically, Captain Wentworth sees them together and he gets very jealous. And when Anne realizes this, she's like, "Oh, he does still love me. If he's jealous of Mr. Elliot, he does still love me," which is really funny. But when she realizes that Captain Wentworth is jealous, she at first she's like, "Oh my goodness, this reaffirms that he loves me," but it also she's like, how am I going to explain that Mr. Elliot means nothing to me, because that when are they going to run into each other? The book says that the only places that she really goes to is like this concert and private dinner parties, whereas Captain Wentworth, he's going to the pump rooms, he's going to the theater, and the Elliots are above going to those places. So she's wondering, how on earth am I going to fix this problem? And it's just like, what a terrible place to be in. Like, that's like, you just have to rely on running into people and mutual friends, basically. And in the end, it is the mutual friends that bring them back together. Not that they are doing it, but they just happen to be in the same company because they have mutual friends. And I love this quote from Anne. This is what makes her different, or one of the things that makes her different from the other Austen heroines. It's this. Anne says this to herself: "Surely if there be constant attachment on each side, our hearts must understand each other ere long. We are not boy and girl to be captiously irritable, misled by every moment's inadvertence, and wantonly playing with our own happiness." So she's like, "We're mature, we can handle this, we'll work it out." When the last time I read Persuasion, I've read it a few times now, I remember being like, "Oh, it's so anticlimactic with the letter. I mean, yeah, it's good, I like the ending, but I feel like it could be more, like they could up the ante and we could have more of a dramatic scene instead of putting it in a letter." This time reading it, though, I was like, oh no, that letter is incredible. Like, every word of that letter is wow, it's so good. And then Jane Austen gives them time. We get to see them together discussing mistakes and misunderstandings and how they feel. So we get that time, we get that satisfaction. But my favorite two sentences, which are quite short, from the letter are this: "You pierce," and by the way, this is Captain Wentworth to Anne, in case I didn't say that. So Captain Wentworth says, "You pierce my soul. I am half agony, half hope." That is incredible. Wow. Now let's talk about something a little bit different. The Elliot pride. So the Elliots are in their area, in their village, they are the highest ranking people, and they are known as having this pride. They think of themselves as too good for their neighbors, and they look down on everyone. Not Anne. Anne doesn't do that, but her father, Sir Walter, her sister Elizabeth, and her younger sister Mary, the three of them really do look down on others, especially Sir Walter and Elizabeth. So the irony with the Elliot pride is that Anne is the only one with pride enough not to bow and scrape before Lady Dalrymple, which is, she's a relative of theirs, who they run into in Bath, and Sir Walter and Elizabeth are just making fools of themselves, bowing and scraping before Lady Dalrymple, and Anne is like, have they no pride? Which is kind of funny, because this whole time they are known for their pride, and now she's like, they have no pride, I have more pride than they do. This shows even more when Elizabeth openly snubs Captain Wentworth when she first sees him. They see each other. They both see that they see each other. Captain Wentworth is about to bow and acknowledge her, and she turns her back on him. She completely rejects his acquaintance, even though they already know each other. So it's extremely rude. The next time, or I guess she sees him one more time. The time after that, she pointedly invites him to dinner because she realizes that he's an important person in Bath. So she has no pride in that. They all know that she openly rejected him, and as soon as she realizes that he's a person worth knowing, then she completely, wow, it is really raining. I'm so sorry if you can hear that. She completely, she has no pride. She just invites him very openly to dinner when it's like, you particularly rejected him. And Anne sees this, and she's just like, oh my goodness, again, no pride. Whereas Anne does have that pride. She does hold herself higher than that. So in a way, pride is full of such double meanings and irony. So perhaps the word that would make more sense for Sir Walter and Elizabeth would be vanity, and that word is used to describe both of them a lot. They are very vain, whereas Anne has self-respect. She's not going to bow and scrape before people that she really doesn't know just because of their station, when she, has other people who she wants to spend time with who really mean something to her, like Mrs. Smith, who is her friend and who is in quite poor circumstances. Now, one thing about Jane Austen is I've noticed this across her books. Like, I love Jane Austen. I love her, believe me. But Jane Austen kind of does this thing where she arranges people in a hierarchy. And not the same hierarchy as a social status, not that kind of hierarchy, but a hierarchy of who is the most sensible, the best character, the most witty, the good character morally. All these things to kind of combine to make a superior person. So an example of this, this idea that some people are superior to others, is this quote that Captain Wentworth says to Anne. He's talking about, this is basically a coded way of him saying, I don't love Louisa and I never did love Louisa. He's talking about how his friend, who is now engaged to Louisa, was engaged to somebody else previously, but that woman named Fanny Harville died. So he's talking about Fanny Harville in relationship to Louisa, just to point out to Anne that he's really not interested in Louisa. So he says, Fanny Harville was a very superior creature to Louisa Musgrove. This is what he says to Anne, and it's like, who's to say that Fanny Harville is superior? Yeah, she might be more sensible, she might be more mature, she might be, have a different personality, but who's to say she's more superior, that she's superior to Louisa? Jane Austen kind of expresses this idea that, that people can be superior to others, where somebody like Elizabeth Gaskell in Wives and Daughters, it's more like everybody's on an even playing field, but everybody has their own eccentricities, everybody's crazy, everybody's, has their uniqueness. A really good example of that is Margaret and Mr. Thornton from North and South. They both have their problems, but they're equal. Even Hyacinth Clare, Mrs. Gibson, Molly's stepmother in Wives and Daughters, she is a terrible character sometimes, but you see her good strength, like her strengths too. You see that side. So, I'm not saying anything against Jane Austen. Again, I'm not putting them in a hierarchy. I'm just saying this is one thing that Jane Austen does, and this is one thing that Elizabeth Gaskell does. And they're different. Okay, let's do the quote reveal. So the first quote that I said was, she was quite unpersuadable. Now, that describes Louisa Musgrove, totally. Louisa is very unpersuadable about anything, but in this case, they're not talking about Louisa Musgrove, they're actually talking about Anne Elliot, the one who was persuaded 8 years ago. So I think Anne is reasonable, but she sticks to her convictions now. She knows herself more, she's more grounded now that she's older. The other quote, which was, but I hate to hear you talking so like a fine gentleman, and as if women were all fine ladies instead of rational creatures. We none of us expect to be in smooth water all our days. So the person who is saying that quote is the sailor's wife who has been on very rough waters a lot of her life and who is in battle. That was Mrs. Croft. So Mrs. Croft is saying this to her brother, Captain Wentworth. Captain Wentworth is the one who's talking as if, women are all fine ladies instead of rational creatures. And maybe that is kind of how Louisa is, but that's not how Anne is, and he's realizing that. So yeah, those are the quotes. Those are my thoughts on Persuasion. I've already started reading Pride and Prejudice instead of diving into a nonfiction. I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to wait for any of my books to arrive. I'm just going to get into Pride and Prejudice because it is so, so good. So yeah, that's all for now, but may you all be filled with peace, hope, love, and joy. So take care, everyone. Bye.